Hey, Shell.
Well, hello, hello, hello. How are you?
I'm
How are
good.
you,
How are you?
Dante?
I am well on this Saturday afternoon. It's some days are better than others, is all I can say.
hmm Well, I want to say we're just going to move forward. And when people join us, they just join us. So we are going to move forward with this. I want to say happy Black History Month. Um, For those of you who are joining in the conversation, I want to thank you so much. I think this is a message. I don't know, Dante, I don't know why I don't see it on my screen, my Facebook page.
If you go to mine,
Okay, I see it.
okay.
Okay, I see it. All righty. So we're going to have a relaxed conversation, hopefully, about race. Race matters. Um, Blackness in America. Um, we're going to talk about Dante's book, The 400-Year Holocaust, I should say. I'm going to dig in deep. So let me just say, Dante, I've been knowing you since you were 16 years old. Do you know that? And
Yeah.
you've always been outspoken. You've always been a peculiar child. You were a peculiar man child, talented beyond measure, had a voice of velvet. But and you would sing in the group, you would hang out with the clique at the Victory Baptist Church, and I really considered you like an honorary member of the clique. You were always there when I needed you, and to sing, to hold that tenor section down. And you
You
would
funny.
come to Bible study. And also sometimes you were my Achilles heel. You know what I'm saying? Because you were just so outspoken. And I'm like, this little 16-year-old boy. And now just the growth, the passion that you have for um, racial issues, how you want us as Black people to understand the fabric of America, the construct, how you are a author of this wonderful book that keeps me just in thought all the time, just introspectively thinking about things, how you are a wordsmith, so knowledgeable, a craftsman, um, in your skill of language.
Hmm.
I am so proud of you. So let me just get this out the way. I'm so proud of you. I don't know what to do. I really am.
Thank you, Shell.
Bravo to you. Thank you so much for your passion about these things and inspiring the next generation to understand the impact of the past. So you won't be confused about what's going on. I think it's befitting that we will have this conversation during Black History Month. But, every day should be Black History, about our Black history. So I can introduce you by telling a little bit about your resume, but you can also do it yourself. So,
Well, no, I mean we don't even have to go through any of that. I'll say this. First of all, thank you very much for all of the support that you've expressed and shown just over this last, well, for a long time, but really over the last month and a half, the conversations that we've engaged in over the phone, just personally, one on one with each other, they've been deep. And I know that the book has caused a lot of reflection for you. So much so that you had to call me up. um, and it's just been wonderful, and the fact that, to the point that you made a moment ago, we have known each other. This year marks 30 years.
Ooh,
right? Yeah. So that's a very long time. You've been a big sister. You've been a mentor in many ways for not just me, but all of us who were around you back in the day at that particular time. And you
mhm.
shepherded us. Yeah,
Oh,
we had our tensions, and a lot of that happens, especially with amongst young people.
yeah,
Um, but it there was always a feeling and an environment of love that existed and that
I
was
hope so.
expressed
I did love
even when
that very
we
much.
yes even when we weren't talking, and that's true from for some other folks that we know that we have in common, and who we may have fallen out at one point of time or another, but the love remains there,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So you are little Stokely Carmichael, Cornell West, Percy Sutton, all wrapped up in one. Oh my goodness. Tell us, first of all, what inspired you to write this book and what was so important for us to know as Black people in
Hmm.
your inspiration?
So I think for me, writing the book was like a reflection of not just my life, but the lives of so many other Black people that I know, in terms of how we um, navigate this environment here in America, especially as Black Americans and people who might have a history where their parents and or grandparents were here during Jim Crow. They may have a lineage that even extends back to the enslavement period,
Mm-hmm.
and in the ways in which we are um, treated in American culture today, from those of us who have attempted to conform to, American institutions of education, American institutions of employment. We see ourselves as having assimilated, and like we may have experienced some of what is regarded as success in white normative mainstream culture, and still being mistreated,
Yep.
still being slapped down, still not ever feeling the same sense of belonging and or validation that other people get.
Right.
And then, so that was one aspect of it, but the other, so that was, well, I was going to say something. I'm not going to say that. So that was one aspect of it. The other was understanding through my study, through my research, how constructed, how intentional white racism has been in anti-Blackness. And we can see some of the remnants of that prevailing even now, or re-emerging, if you will, even now, with voter restriction laws that are,
Federal.
surfacing all over this country. There's a reaction to what people are calling critical race theory, which is
Mhm.
really the only thing that critical race theory is looking at the role that race has played in constructing the law and all American institutions, right? And so, in this culture, we are in an environment where white people never really have to reflect on what members of their organization did to indigenous people, have done to Black people. And we are in this environment that has been perpetuated or propagated, rather, as a normal environment, not understanding that the American governmental structure, the American legal structure, the American economic structure, all of these structures have been created by white people for white people. And that is why white people are, have a superior status, whether it be economically, whether it be, entrepreneurship wise, whether it be in housing and so forth, and because it was set up that way. And so my work looks at the legality of it all and how that emerged. And so gaining a very deepened understanding of just how severe and how diabolically severe race in America has functioned in terms of what white people have done and felt that they have had to do in order to make themselves superior. I needed for so many other people to know and to be able to tap into at least some of the knowledge that I share during my lectures and in classes that I teach. So
Yeah.
that was my motivation. And then the last thing I'll say is I thought I was going to die. I've been feeling like, oh, I'm not going to make it to 50 because
Oh,
I've been dealing with my own personal woes with in organizations that I've worked with since I can remember. You know, I won't go deep off into it, but I've been through a lot of things in my own life. And then we go through things personally in this world, in this culture, in this country, where we are consistently reminded that we're Black in ways that
yes.
don't feel good,
Right.
in ways that don't feel good.
Right.
So I wrote this book for Black people. Let's just be clear. I say that everywhere I go. I say it in the book. I wrote this book for Black people and I wanted to amplify our perspective. I wanted to amplify and humanize our experiences in terms of the impacts that anti-Black racism has had on us because we don't have many opportunities to do that. And when we do, we get pathologized by white people and by gatekeepers of whiteness who say, well, those people are angry, they're too upset, they're emotional, they're difficult, they're this, they're that. And it's time out for all of that. So anyway.
Yes. Wow. So anti-blackness, um, or whiteness here in America, it's important for us to understand as Black people here in America, understand that we have not been in an environment when it wasn't that.
Right.
Would you agree? Because
Absolutely.
everything is represented in that way. Like we live in a white world and we just have to thrive, struggle, and deal with oppression. Because when America was constructed, it was constructed for us to be dehumanized forever. Would you say that?
Yes.
Like
I mean,
it took us to rise up and get these rights, but would you say that it was America really was meant for us to serve and that's it? Don't have any rights. We've never been. It's been a struggle for us to represent in with money, wealth, medical health, medical attention, health, government policies, jobs, religion, sports, entertainment, the judicial system. I mean, it's that's everything. That's everything,
mhm.
right? So, I don't think that it was just ever meant for us to be treated as human. We have to fight for that, right? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that fighting, that whole idea or reality of having to fight is one that is extremely unhealthy. And we look at it as though it's somewhat of a legacy. And it is. It is our legacy that we have to fight. But many times we take pride in that, not understanding the toll that that has taken on members of our community that have been front and center in this fight, and that even as a people, the toll that it takes on our community every day to be aggressed and to be assaulted just by the very nature of our reality of our existence. That's not a healthy reality, and
Exactly.
it's nothing to be proud about. That we keep having to struggle or try to overcome degrading circumstances because one group of people have sanctioned in their mind that we are not human, and they've created a cultural orientation. They've created a cultural orientation that persists, that entails within the very nature of how we get regarded, how we're treated, what we're referred to as, that we are not human. And because we do not learn our history correctly, we feel like, oh, um, this progress has been made in this country, that in some way the majority of white people are progressive and are more aligned with the fight for equality. Absolutely not. No
No.
one who let's just have a logical discussion very quickly, and then I want to
Okay.
share a portion of this video. Why would you want equality with people that are sanctioned lesser than you, that have been deemed in the cultural apparatus that's been constructed through the institutions that exist,
Right.
that these people have been designated as less than? And
Yes.
now I want to team up with these people that have been deemed less than me, while
Right.
I'm continuing to benefit from
Right.
all of the privileges that my membership to the white organization provides for me. I'm continuing to benefit from that, but I want to be an ally to people who have been deemed less than me. It doesn't make sense. It's not even logical. And so anyone that is Black who seeks that type of validation or allyship, if you will, it's just not a reasonable, it's not a reasonable state of being. And to the point, I just want to make one last point, and I want to share this video. Because we don't learn our history correctly, we don't realize through different presidential administrations, through the 19th century, and I'm talking about through President Andrew Jackson, James Monroe, James Polk, Zachary Taylor, through Lincoln.
Yeah.
They wanted Black people gone from this country. W.E.B. Du Bois, in his book, Black Reconstruction in America, in the
Yes.
book, Black
Yes.
Reconstruction in America, he talks about it in grave detail, in dire detail. He talks about how Lincoln went to Panama, to Costa Rica, to seek out,
Liberia, right? And
to
Liberia.
well, yeah, that was established in during James Monroe's
Okay. Oh yeah,
presidency.
different president.
Yeah,
We
but
were supposed to build America and get on up out of here, right?
absolutely, absolutely. So I'm going to share this video, and this is from a Black paper on white racism, which was filmed in 1971, and it features Dr. John Henrik Clark, who was a professor at Clark Atlanta University
Okay.
in the 90s. Here we go.
We got to get the volume together. I can't hear it. Can you?
You can't hear it? I can hear it.
No, I
But wait a
can't
minute.
hear it.
Okay, let me see. Can y'all hear it? Can the people out there hear it? Post a comment if you can hear it. I think they can hear it, sure.
Okay.
But
Go ahead.
wait a minute. Let me just see. Okay, here we go. Oh, maybe that's what it was. 1 second. Share system audio. There we go.
I can't hear it, Dante.
You can't hear it?
Comment if you can hear it, those who are live.
Can you all hear it?
Ooh, I remember this conversation. I've seen this conversation before.
Are they saying? Yeah, it's one that I know I've shared different times. Let me just see.
I think I was watching this conversation on YouTube the other week.
Yeah, can they hear it? Can people hear it?
So I don't know, but you can tell us where to go and listen to it. Tell us about it. You give us a a narrative on what they're
He
saying.
basically says,
And when you say he, who?
Dr. John Henry Clark.
Okay.
He says, and I'm going to quote him because I actually do have it written out somewhere. He says, let's deal with our own historical naivete. Until we deal with it, we're not going any place. He's basically saying because we don't learn history correctly, we don't have an enlightened perspective on it. He says Black people have no right to expect anything from this establishment because it wasn't set up for them.
Yes.
I'm actually going to share this screen, the slide. Here we go. He says, they were not brought to this country to be given democracy. They were brought to this country to do some work, to labor and to obey. And once the machines made a whole lot of these jobs obsolete, it tended to make a whole lot of the people obsolete. We keep worrying about the American promise and the American dream, and we forget it wasn't made to us. The white man has not betrayed us with anything because he did not promise anything to us in the first place. The role of institutions in a society is to reflect the power that controls that society. So we have American institutions that have been raised against us, and we naively expect these institutions to reform themselves.
It's 3:00.
And it's just not going to happen. And so when people say, "Oh, we're in a fight for justice and equality," Malcolm X said it best: when you are in another man's country, in another man's land, under another man's court system, under another man's government system, you have to look to that other man for justice, and you'll never get it. So, when we look at even the young girls, I give a few examples in my book around these two young girls who went to school, and because of the way their hair was done, one was suspended for 3 days. The other one was excluded from her school picture.
Yeah.
It continues to be reinforced that we don't belong, but we never take time out to consider the dire mental, emotional, and physical effects of not belonging. And we say to these same young girls, these same children that are being degraded when they go home, now you should grow up to be a responsible, focused, a responsible adult. Why didn't you get good grades at the end of the school year? Well, because they see me as deficient. It's because the teacher, in their nature of how they treat the children, they don't respond to me in the same way they're responding to little Timmy or little Bobby. It's an entirely different experience. But because many of these things we don't make room for, there's no room to really interrogate them in this culture, we then see that same person and now they're 16, 17, dealing with the wrong young man or in the wrong relationship. And now we want to judge them. Why are they so fast? Why do they drop out of school? Why do you think? When I think the average age for young Black boys being when they start to be suspended from school is like 3 or 4 years old.
And then
this
like
country,
5 years old, they make the determination if they're going to be successful or in prison or something.
Right.
Crazy.
This country has always been against Black people, and there's no time. And let me say this, it's not just always been against Black people, it's always been in favor of white people.
White people, yes.
Right. And so even when, and I'm not trying to go so deep, but one of the things that I explore in my work, right? People say, well, don't you think you exaggerate so much when you say that, like, law enforcement in this country, for example, American policing was founded upon slave patrols?
Right.
No, not at all. It's not.
Who ask you that? Like Black people would ask you that?
Well, no,
Because
some
we know
black,
that was the genesis of policing, right?
but I think to some, Shell, without specific detail, and without examples, right? To
Mm-hmm.
make that type of assertion, it is, if you don't provide data or tangible information for people,
And you
it
have,
can be
and you have,
it can
yes,
be
baby, you have done your studies and your
right.
research. Yes.
So I'll just say this, and I'll give just two or three quick examples, right? But this is a law in 1664. Now we're talking about the law, right? This is the legal apparatus being built.
In America.
Um, yeah, and
Okay.
this is Maryland.
Okay.
Be it enacted by the Right Honorable, the Lord Proprietary, by the advice and consent of the upper and lower house of this present General Assembly, that all Negroes or other slaves already within the province, and all Negroes and other slaves to be hereafter imported into the province, shall serve durante vita, hard labor for life. Okay,
Ooh.
so through this one law, now let's go just say to ourselves, so the law enforcement body is set up now to enforce laws that the General Assembly has set up that makes all Black people slaves. So now Black people have, and they didn't have it before, but now it's legally sanctioned, right? So no agency over their body. It is legal to ensure that these people are imprisoned on slave labor camps that we talk about as plantations. That minimizes what it was severely. These are prisons that Black people are put onto. And so the law,
You're calling plantation prisons.
yes, they
Yeah.
are.
Uh-huh.
They are. And the only difference between those plantations and the jail system, when the
Mm-hmm.
jail system is established in the, let's say, the 18th century into the 19th century, is that it's more of a societal communal ownership.
Mm-hmm.
It changes from an individual ownership to a societal communal ownership. But we are not taught this history, and we're not taught to look at it in ways that frame it as Black people were brought to America to be imprisoned by white people forever.
Yes.
Forever.
In the beginning, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
they have in they have continued the legacy of white ownership over Black bodies, can be seen in terms of the ways in which we are dealt with in all of American institutions: education,
Yes.
employment,
Yes.
economically. We didn't create
Yes.
any of these systems. We don't own them. They have total control over our wages.
Yes.
Go to the Fortune 500 Fortune 500 companies, right? Which are like the key foundational institutions that basically fund America.
Yes.
None of the CEOs, you got, I think, maybe 3 or 4 CEOs that are Black men, and they're voted in by boards that are predominantly and primarily white. But most of them, over 90% of those CEOs are white. And
Yeah.
so it is an economic ownership. It is an
That's what, yeah.
institutional ownership.
Yeah.
It is an ownership in culture, of language. When people say, well, what about rap music? Well, guess what? That is an expression of white culture.
Mm-hmm.
If we were all to take a DNA test and locate the predominance of our DNA in terms of the group that we come from, for me, it was Cameroonian, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have their own languages. English was not their language of origin. And so have been indoctrinated even with our language. And so we made rap music, soul music, R&B music out of an English language that was not ours.
Mm-hmm. That was my native tongue.
No. And I think we have to begin to question the root and the core of these conditions and the conditioning that we've undergone in order to fully understand the magnitude of all of this, right? And so let me just go back to this very quickly. I want to say this, right? Even looking to, for example, um, laws that commissioned that Black people could be Christian, right, or could become Christian, because
Oh Lord, here we
within the
oh,
within the
hold on now.
no, and they're all in my book, Shell.
I
The information is
yes.
right there,
Come
right?
on.
But prior to, what's very evident to me, at least, and I can't say I have like all all encompassing information, no,
Information.
but I have all encompassing information as it pertains to the structure of America and how America was built. All we have to do is go to the state archives and the federal archives. This is public information that I'm pointing to, right? But if you go to the laws, like for example, the law of 1667, which is a law that I talk about, it is very clear, and not just from this law, but from an array of laws, both throughout Virginia, Maryland, Massachusetts, within those initial colonies, that they are getting people from countries that are not Christian in origin, that have no Christian affiliation. It's written all throughout the laws. So I'm going to point to one in 1667, and I think it's important to understand that under English common law, at this particular juncture, in the early to mid 17th century into the 18th century, Christianity and that identity, as it's mentioned in the legal context, because you see all of these laws that begin to identify English, Indian, Negro, mulatto, and or they will say other freeborn, okay? What's very clear is that one fact to know, I'll say it this way, is that Christianity was specific to either English people or other Europeans who were non-English, but it carried an ethno-religious connotation, similarly to how, in most cases, how people relate to Jewish people as though it being an ethno-religious group. That's how Christianity was regarded during this time. And because these Black people that they then deemed as Negroes, and also some people from indigenous groups and tribes, because they weren't identified as Christian, because they had their own religious
Way to worship.
affiliations. Yeah. There was a campaign that was launched on these people where they basically got together English leaders and other whites, presumptually, they or presumably they got together and they started creating laws to ensure that under English common law, Black people and Indian people would not be free if they became Christian, because under the law, Christians could not be enslaved.
Wow.
Under the law, Christians could not be enslaved.
Okay.
And I believe that was an extension of a law that was passed in like 1547 in England, which actually banned, I think that law may have banned the enslavement of English people. In any case, Christian people could not be enslaved. So they needed to create a law that permitted them to be able to perform baptism on indigenous and Black people to make them Christian. But they couldn't do it under the original law, because if they baptized these Black babies, if they baptized these Indian babies, they would automatically become free. So in 1667, they say, whereas some doubts have risen whether children that are slaves by birth and by the charity and piety of their owners, made partakers of the blessed sacrament of baptism, should by virtue of their baptism be made free It is enacted and declared by this grand assembly and the authority thereof, that the conferring of baptism doth not alter the condition of the person as to his bondage or freedom. That diverse masters, freed from this doubt, may more carefully endeavor the propagation of Christianity by permitting children, though slaves, or those of growth, if capable, to be admitted to that sacrament. So we're going to make it convenient for you, Black people, to allow you to become Christians and keep you enslaved.
Let's say their interpretation of Christianity. Okay, because
what does that mean?
I mean, because
Our churches are built on the
was
same
based
principles.
on Jesus Christ back in Bible days.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to say their interpretation as what a Christian should be. I would like to say that. Okay.
That's where we get our foundation, though, in as Black American people. Our sects of religion, starting with the Presbyterian Church in 1706, the AME Church in the
religious organization,
the Baptist Church. Yeah, it comes right out of this model. I didn't create that.
Yeah, I don't want to. That.
We can go on. Yeah, we can go.
Now,
but again, can I shine a light on something else, Shell? Okay. What I want people to understand, though, is that in the construction of these laws, based on what they're doing, so yeah, we're going to baptize you and we're going to make you Christian, but we're still going to rape your women and young girls. We're still going to pimp them out so that they can have as many babies as they can to support our system of labor. Mm-hmm. We're going to kill you and beat you if you don't comply with the orchestrated cultural terror that we're thrusting upon you. If you don't pick enough cotton fast enough, we're going to beat you till you bleed. If you have a baby with a white man, he's going to have to pay a fine, but we're going to tie you to a whipping post and give you 30 lashes on your bare back. This is all being done. So a few connections here. This is all being done under the auspices of people who deem themselves God-loving, moral, upstanding, virtuous Christian people.
And that's why I said their interpretation of Christianity. You know what I'm saying?
But no,
they just misconstrued Christianity altogether. But I do realize the way we worship in church and all of that, it's a lot like Catholicism. The way we worship. Because sometimes I think about, were we even meant to worship like this before we got to this country? You know what I'm saying? Can I ask you something about the word Holocaust? I've never really heard of it used in the way you have used it in your book. I always felt like I don't want to get in trouble for this, but so excuse me and pardon my ignorance. I've always felt that was a Jewish word. Though I do know the definition of it, I just thought that, perhaps we are not supposed to use it, just like we don't want nobody to use the N word. You know what I'm saying? That's our word. Don't use it. And I felt like Holocaust was their word. So what inspired you to use that? Because most people use enslavement or bondage, and you just straight up was like, the 400-year Holocaust. We had one too as Black folks. So you have the floor on that.
So you're asking me um,
Your
why?
choice
I
of
mean, I
word.
think you, yeah. So you said something that I think is very interesting,
Hmm.
um, which is that you felt like it was a Jewish word, right?
I usage. Usage. I
Right,
know it's not their word, but their usage.
right.
Word usage. Uh-huh.
So I think, but and I would ask you in turn, why did you have that reference point, and what in your past educational experience made it so that you only relate that word to Jewish people?
Well, because I wasn't educated to in much of Black history other than Martin Luther King. So, I we were kept from that.
Yeah.
So,
And
but
so
they educated us about the Holocaust.
right. And I would argue to that point, to your point, and not argue with you, but I would argue just in general to the point that you just made, that we are educated very with substantial limits, so that your association and your main reference
Hmm.
for that word would be linked to something like maybe the movie Schindler's List
Yeah.
or the Jewish Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., right? If you just go and Google the word Holocaust, you'll see one of the definitions. It says destruction or slaughter on a mass scale, especially caused by fire or nuclear war, etc. But destruction or slaughter on a mass scale,
Hmm.
right? And so when you look at what I lay out in my book, about the destruction and slaughter of Black people psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, um, it's very clear in terms of the ways in which we have been um, accosted or um, continuously disenfranchised in this country, stemming back to the period that I just referenced a moment ago in the 1600s, but I'm going to bring it a little bit more current, and I want to share some other information. So, if you, in 1916, there was a book by this guy, a eugenicist named Madison Grant. He says in this book, and I'm going to share some additional quotes from him. And Dr. Ibram Kendi, in his book Stamped from the Beginning, he references this too. But he says the races vary intellectually and morally, just as they do physically. It has taken 50 years to learn that speaking English, wearing good clothes, and going to school and church does not transform a Negro into a white man. Okay. Um, he created a racial ladder where he prioritized European people as superior in mental development, in moral development. They were superior in every way, and he categorized or positioned Black people at the bottom of that racial ladder. He
Mm.
says physical and physical disharmonies are common among crosses between Indians, Negroes, and whites. I have to fix this. But where the parents are more closely related racially, we often obtain individuals occupying the borderland between genius and insanity. It's important to understand this is an American eugenicist. There are other eugenicists. Sir Francis Galton, he was an English eugenicist. But the study of eugenics, which
Yes.
is a
Cool.
white American science, is something that white people created to say that they were more superior in character, in morals, in intellect. It's a science they created. You can think of it as a sociological science that they just one day started, or not one day, because it was decades and centuries of them believing this diabolical idea or this diabolical
Mm.
perspective or having it. But in doing so, you've got people like Adolf Hitler who begin to look at what America is doing with their eugenics program. And he hails this book as his Bible. So Madison Grant, he says, for reasons already set forth, there are few communities outside of Europe of pure European blood. The racial destiny of Mexico and of the islands and coasts of the Spanish Main is clear. The white man is being rapidly bred out by Negroes on the islands and by Indians on the mainland. It is quite evident that the West Indies, the coast region of our Gulf states, perhaps also the Black Belt of the lower Mississippi Valley, must be abandoned to Negroes. He theorized in this book that the way to stop Negro reproduction was to ensure that we were isolated in ghettos, that we would be confined together in ghettos, and all of our reproductive activity would be halted. And he talked about ways that that could be done: deprivation of resources, lack of access. He says this transformation is already complete in Haiti and is going rapidly forward in Cuba and Jamaica. So let's isolate those Black people on that island, and at a certain point, their lifespan will begin to become shorter and shorter if we keep resources from them. Mexico and in the northern part of South America must also be given over to Native Indians with an ever-thinning veneer of white culture of the Latin type. Okay, many of these things, Shell, have come true today in a sense. I won't get into that because that's a whole other discussion. But he said,
No, because I am getting emotional right now.
so Hitler looked to not only Madison Grant, because him by himself, he wasn't all powerful. He's just a white man in America who considered himself a social scientist, right? So he says a lot. So, but if you go to, so that's Grant, and
That's
that's
a
Hitler.
lot. That's a lot. See, that's why I can't. That's why I can't talk to you like for a long periods of time, because then I start thinking about stuff and reflecting and thinking about how that is even true today. How that's the genesis of it, but it's still happening in present time.
It's very true. And if you look at how the Supreme Court began to rule that Black people could be shoved into ghetto neighborhoods and isolated, that's 1926. That's just 10 years later. When you look at how they used these theories, and they used them on Black people, so much so that when my mother went to buy a home in Oakland in 1977, she was only shown predominantly Black areas. She was only shown Black areas because many white people, and again, I think we have to make the connection. He went to Yale. He was able to go through Yale, get funding for this type of study to graduate with a degree in eugenics. So it's not just him alone. You've got American institutions that are supporting these ideas and memorializing them as intellectual ideas that are then used as education, and they're accessed by the American federal government, so that in 1927 you've got a decision that's rendered by the Supreme Court of the United States, which is in Buck v. Bell, which was a decision of the United States Supreme Court, in which the court ruled that the state statute permitting compulsory sterilization of the unfit, including the intellectually disabled, for the protection and health of the state, did not violate the due process clause of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. So now it's okay to sterilize people that you see as unfit. So who did this target? It targeted Black people predominantly. So that between 1929 and 1974 in North Carolina alone, you've got 7,600 people that were compulsory sterilized, but 5,000 of them were Black. So to back up, going back to your question, Why did you call this book the Holocaust? Because number
It
one,
sure enough is. That's why.
Hitler looked to America
Yeah.
for his ideas about what to do with Jewish
Oh my
people.
God, Dante.
And he looked to what the Supreme Court was doing. He looked at social scientists like Madison Grant, and from the eugenics movement, where tubal ligations were planted on Black women, young Black girls, without their consent. I had a white doctor tell me just a few months ago that when he was a resident at Duke University between 1970 and 1974, he located 16-year-old Black virgins to give them hysterectomies. Now, if you don't think that that is diabolical or sociopathic or psychopathic, and again, it was legal. It was legalized. He wasn't just operating without the jurisdiction or authority of the institution and of the American governmental or legal structure. He was operating within those confines. So my book is called The 400-Year Holocaust: White America's Legal, Psychopathic, and Sociopathic Black Genocide. And the title is befitting when you begin to study and synthesize what American legality is all about and how it has been used as a tool of weaponry against Black people. And all of them, let's be clear, all of American institutions have been built and have functioned in that way, and they are still functioning in that way.
Yeah. Whew. Yeah, that's a lot to ingest. That's a lot. A resolution. Is there one? Can there ever be one? And let me just say this. Dante is just simply giving us data, stats, and facts. So I know that, I have good white girlfriends who are my sisters and my allies. I love them. And they stand with me as allies. And we're not saying that, individually, there are some white people that are allies. But systemically, that's what that's what white folks gotta understand, that, and they are in denial about it. Like they could never even really listen to this conversation because they're like they're so engulfed in that system that they are totally in denial, and we are living it every single day. Dante,
we have lived it. We've heard our parents talk about their experience with it. We've heard our grandparents, for those of us that have a deep Black lineage, we've heard our grandparents, our great grandparents talk about their bouts with it. It's been in the history. And so I also just, if I can share another example before we go. And
then we're going to bring it back to current day. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Then we'll go.
Absolutely. So one of the things I do bring up in my book, and this is going to be pretty, I want to give a trigger warning because this is going to be visually disturbing to some people in some ways.
Well, like that last picture you just put up with the Black woman on the.
I know.
I'm
sorry. I'm sorry. I did not know I was going to show that. I know. I got to that slide and was like, oh, yeah. One of the things we hear, but we don't look at in terms of the the legitimacy of it all. The legitimacy of it all. And I'm going to be quick. I'll try to be quick. But the sanctioning of rape of Black women that arose and it's very clear in the 19th century, in the 1800s, right? So you've got during the 19th century all of these statutes that situate and characterize rape as though it is a crime that is being committed by Black men. All of these laws say that Black men, it is a crime for Black men and Black boys to rape white women and girls. Okay? Few of them, the two top ones, mention white men, but the other ones don't. That means that the commission of rape by white men in those states at this particular juncture was not a crime. But the main thing that I want to point to is that all of the laws are according to white women. Rape being committed against a white woman, rape being committed against a Black woman does not exist. So Black women are the subject of rape, of legal rape in America for centuries, both by statute and then even when cases go to court. You've got this case here where this young enslaved girl by the name of Celia was 14. And there was a book that was recently written on this. It's called Celia, a Slave.
Yeah.
She begged and pleaded for help from her master's daughter, her rapist daughters. I believe he had like 2 or 3 daughters. She pleaded for help. And to no avail. There was no support. He had been raping her since she was 14. She had had 2 children by him. She was pregnant with the third. And she basically said, if he comes toward me again, I'm going to kill him. And I think we have to humanize Celia and say to ourselves, how horrible a state of being where someone's only option is to murder someone because the pain that they're enduring, the atrocity that is being thrust upon them is so vile and so severe that there's no other option available. There's no protection in the legal system. There's no protection in the familial system in terms of members of her community and her family. They couldn't necessarily protect her. It's even
they couldn't protect her, not necessarily.
Right.
They
no, because that would equal murder for whoever tried to step in and protect her. But the judge, I want you to pay attention to what the judge says in this case. He says if Newsom was in the habit of having intercourse with the defendant, so if he was in the habit of raping her and he went to her cabin on the night he was killed to have intercourse with her, to rape her, or for any other purpose, and while he was standing in the floor talking to her, she struck him with a stick, which was a dangerous weapon, and knocked him down and struck him again after he fell and killed him by either blow. It is murder in the first degree. So he ordered her murder. He ordered for her to be put to death. And so the jury sentenced her to death. They appealed the case to the Missouri Supreme Court, but the court upheld the ruling. But they delayed her execution long enough so that she could have the baby to be able to give birth to the child so that it could be worth something to the estate. There was no concern about her humanity or the humanity of the baby. And so Darlene Clark Hine, and I actually quote her in my book, she says, the Missouri courts declared that in the eyes of the law, Black women, in particular slave women, were not women. The court delayed execution until the birth of Celia's child so as not to deprive the Newsom estate of the profit of Celia's rape. The baby, however, was stillborn. Newsom's daughters refused to comment on their father's abuse of Celia or to respond in any way to her entreaties for help. Their silence was in keeping with the politics of denial. For these plantation mistresses to have aided Celia would have meant that they and other similarly situated white women had to acknowledge openly that their fathers brothers and husbands were rapists. If you go to George v. State in 1859, the Mississippi Supreme Court ruled that a male slave could only commit a rape upon a white woman, and that the rape that had been committed upon this young black girl was not rape, because it was only rape if it was committed on the person of a white woman. The court reasoned that slaves were not protected by the common law or statutes because they were under the legal dominion of their masters as required by their status as property. If you go to Dallas v. State, the Florida Supreme Court, this is 1918, and I want to point out, now we're out of slavery. This is 53 years after enslavement has been abolished. But in this ruling by the Florida Supreme Court, because they have sanctioned and deemed that black women are immoral, they're saying in this decision that black women can't be raped. So they say what has been said by some of our courts about an unchaste female being a comparatively rare exception is no doubt true where the population is composed largely of the Caucasian race. But we would blind ourselves to actual conditions if we adopted this rule where another race that is largely immoral constitutes an appreciable part of this population. And so I believe it is high time for us as Black people to fully understand how we have been positioned in this culture. And it's not just about white people, but it's the fact that white people created a negative orientation that positions Black people as suspicious, as insufficient, as deficient, as any variable that has a negative association and connotation. And it is inescapable. And we are still dealing with the effects of this today.
And so one would argue, well, not to that degree.
Oh, we are. And they can only argue that if it's not their firsthand experience, if they're speaking from ignorance and or some type of absence of information and or a lack of empathy, which is also what I talk about in my book.
Yes.
Of course you want to minimize and downplay it, because that just perpetuates the reality that you don't consider me human, that you have a lack of empathy and regard for my humanity. So if you say, well, not to that degree, go ask Centoya Brown's parents, go ask Sandra Bland's parents, go ask John Crawford, Tamir Rice, Oscar Grant, Charlena Lyles, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery,
and
George
this
Floyd,
new person,
Khalid Browder, Amir Locke. Right.
Dante, this
Amir
new
Locke.
thing that happened in Mississippi last week with the Federal Express person going, did you hear about that? He was just simply delivering packages.
Oh, yes.
And the Cases, their last name is Cases, father and son, last name Case, just start shooting them for no reason.
Right. So go ask the families of those people,
right,
if things have changed and things are better. Go ask them and see what perspective you get. Those are the perspectives that matter, not people who aren't experiencing these circumstances and or don't have any empathy or regard. I don't even waste my time having conversations with them, because you know what you're going to get. And that is what I'm mapping out in my book.
Mm-hmm.
And my book was simply written to validate and uplift not just the perspectives, but the realities of Black people, both past and present, and to contribute to a larger conversation that's been had and has continued to be had over the last 400 years of our existence in this country.
Well, this was supposed to be a high-level discussion.
It has been a high-level discussion.
No, it hasn't. You've gone into details, and I'm glad that you have, because we need to know this, and we don't, and we need to know it because we as Black folks need to understand why it is what it is. You know what I'm
Yes.
saying? Because
Now,
like I found myself, let's talk about
Shell, can I make one point before you go on to that?
okay.
Before you do, I want to be quick. But one of the things, and I shared this very widely, and I positioned this way on purpose, and I just want to wrap this up based on the last examples that I just shared.
Okay.
Um, but that anti-Black female human sex trafficking, rape, pedophilia, and prostitution were American institutions. They were white, moral, and economic foundational institutions. They represent the American cultural evolutionary norms that were legally sanctioned, both legislatively and judicially, for almost 300 years, or more, really more than 300 years. These institutions constitute and represent a core tenet represented in white psychology, white identity, white morality, white legality, white power, privilege, and culture, while also conveying a complete and total disconnectedness from Black humanity, the Black body, and a proclivity towards anti-Black abuse and terror. And so Dr. Alvin Poussant, he said in his, in an interview in 1971, he says, I think we have to establish that racism, white racism, is a mental illness. Many of the social scientists would like to define racism as something that is normal, as a cultural variant. As long as we approach it that way, we really do not deal with the pathology of racism itself. It's like saying that cancer, because a lot of people have it in this society, is somehow normal. Dr. Bobby Wright, in his essays on the psychopathic racial personality, he says in their relationship with the Black race, whites are psychopaths and their behavior represents an underlying biologically transmitted proclivity with roots deep in their evolutionary history. The psychopath is an individual who is constantly in conflict with other persons or groups. He is unable to experience guilt, is completely selfish and callous, and has a total disregard for the rights of others. One of the best methods that can be used to measure the psychopathic traits of the white race is observing and analyzing their universal overt behaviors and attitudes towards black people. He says psychopaths simply ignore the concept of right and wrong. By ignoring this trait in the white race, the lack of ethical and moral development, and I argue in my work, Shell, that those laws are creating that lack of ethical and moral development. It just doesn't exist from the beginning until the present. And Dr. Ibram Kendi talks about this in his book, Stamped from the Beginning. He says that because of this lack of ethical and moral development, Blacks have made and are still making a tragic mistake in basing the worldwide Black liberation movement on moral suasion. It is pathological, meaning it is delusional for Black people to keep attempting to use moral suasion on a people who have no morality, where race is the variable. And I say this in my book because I absolutely agree with that perspective. There's no other conclusion you can draw if you're on the receiving end of this saying, wow, it was legal for my grandmother to be raped by my next door neighbor's grandfather. And it's the leaders of these institutions that shaped the culture this way and permitted these rights for every common white person that lived during that period.
Can I ask, and excuse my ignorance once more, these laws still exist?
The reality, so the fact is this, the reality is this. It's not about whether they still exist or not.
Right.
What we need to focus on is how it shaped culture.
How it shaped it. Yeah, how it shaped America.
How it doesn't matter whether the fact that it existed at all, any.
Yes.
And the fact that from the 1600s through the 1900s, we can point to explicit laws and policies that constitute and facilitate the degradation of Black people. I think for anyone to be preoccupied with, do these laws still exist today? That's not a viable concern. I think a more viable concern. Well, let me not say that. I don't think I would not suggest that anyone waste time or energy preoccupied with that, because we know that such explicit laws like that don't exist today. However, what does exist today are laws that, or judicial decisions that allow Brock Turner to get off for the rape of that woman, because the judge says because she was under the influence, that was a circumstance that allowed him to give Brock Turner probation for sexual assault. The young guy in where was it? New York, and I talk about this in my book as well, right? Judge Joseph, I think Murphy, or Judge Murphy. This was November 2021. This young white guy admitted to raping 4 young girls, and the judge gave him probation. He was facing upwards of 8 years in prison. So when you say these laws still don't exist today, decisions just like the ones that I just showed you are still being rendered through the court system.
Practiced.
Absolutely. It's inherent within the culture.
Right. Because it's the fabric of the culture.
We had a candidate for president say, you can just do anything you want to these women. You can grab them by the pee.
You mean a president?
Well, he was the candidate then.
Oh, okay.
But the point is
he got elected.
He got elected. That's the point.
And go run again in 2024. So we got to start worrying all over again.
That's the point. And so to not be able
to... It still exists.
Yes.
Wow.
And so to not be able to make these connections for ourselves, we are then shocked and surprised whenever we're seeing this. And, we feel some kind of way. Why is this happening? I thought we were moving toward progress. I thought we were on our way somewhere. You only thought that, just like me. I thought that too. You only think that. For anyone who's ever thought that, you have only thought that because you are uninformed about the true history of this country and what has gone on in the past, because there's nothing happening right now with the Supreme Court dismantling voter right legislation through their decisions. There's nothing different about that than what happened during the period between 1873 and 1900, when within 6 Supreme Court decisions that I have knowledge of and that I actually share, within 6 of those decisions, they dismantled Black people's protection under the 14th Amendment. They dismantled our entire rights under the 14th Amendment. And because of that, because they said that Black people was that the 14th Amendment did not protect Black people against individual acts of violence, it didn't protect Black people from basically being discriminated against, right? All of our rights were dismantled through court decisions, but we don't learn that in school. What we learned is that Black people were granted, for those that were enslaved, were granted freedom, a condition freedom from enslavement, which is a condition that never should have existed in the first place. We were free. We were free before we were traded or bought or stolen.
Right.
But we give praise and recognition to white leaders who, when they thought it was time, supposedly or allegedly freed us, and no freedom came from it.
Wouldn't you say that was about economics as well, for us being freed? Right. Or
I would say it was about foreign policy. It wasn't about economics.
Okay.
I think we have to understand, and again, W.E.B. Du Bois in his book, Black Reconstruction in America, he talks about the fact that the United States was almost at war with Europe. The English had abolished slavery already. Europe had And so the prime minister, and I forget his name, but the prime minister there was trying to, or planning to wage a war, another American would have been the second American Civil War, or I'm sorry, not Civil War, but the American Revolutionary War. It would have been the second American Revolutionary War had it happened, and because England, they were looking at us as a nation of civil rights, of human rights abuses, because slavery was still intact here legally. It was like, what do we do? The U.S. was in a bind, if you will, and even Abraham Lincoln's abolishment of slavery, that only came because in the states that seceded from the United States, from the Union, which they called it, he wanted to send a message. So he abolished slavery in only the states that seceded. The border states, Tennessee, I think it was Eastern Virginia, he left those alone. He left slavery intact there because he wasn't concerned about abolishing it everywhere. But it wasn't about economics. It was more about, I would say, foreign relations, if you will.
Foreign relations. But yeah. Well, I mean, wars are expensive. So if they didn't free the slaves, and it could have possibly been another revolution.
Well, there was a civil war, which is
why. I know it was a civil war, but you're saying, I'm understanding you to say that America was in a bind. So they pretty much had to free the slaves, or it would have become another revolution.
No, I mean, we already had states that were leaving the United States of America. These states became their own country. They became the Confederate States of America, right? So in order to try to get those states back in alignment, a civil war was declared.
Yes.
So that Lincoln could ensure, I forget when exactly it happened, but as slaves began to escape from the plantation, as some white men were called off to war, it left open many opportunities for slave escapees for people who were escaping from plantations, for that to be bolstered or accelerate, because now you've got the masters and the overseers who previously would be at these plantations or on these plantations. They're now gone. So you've got either the wife or mother or whomever trying to oversee a plantation of people. And some enslaved people get wind of that and say, I'm out. So they start running away. Lincoln says, for the states that have seceded, I'm now abolishing slavery where you are. And as these Black people do escape, we're going to take them as contraband, because you all are committing treason against the U.S. anyway. That's the only reason he abolished it. But again, as a political move, he left slavery intact in southern states that hadn't seceded from the United States. And the only reason he then abolished or enacted rather the Emancipation Proclamation is because by that time you had Black people who had been commissioned to fight in the Civil War. And so the tune changed. It had nothing to do with our interest. It had nothing to do with him being a moral leader. None of that. But that's what we learned. And we also learned that we should be grateful that some white man freed Black people. I think it's not only nonsensical, it's delusional. And it is a reflection of the ways in which we've been oppressed in our thought process, so that we would be grateful that someone came along and freed our ancestors. You know who I'm grateful for? I'm grateful for the David Walkers of the world. I'm grateful for the Nat Turners of the world who resisted it and said, you know what, since you all want to be violent with us, I believe in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That's who I'm grateful for.
Well, indeed, I am a student.
I am too. I am too. I don't know everything, but I feel like I have located enough information to have a very nuanced, informed, and in some ways unique perspective. But again, my teachers have been the Angela Davises and the James Baldwins and the Fannie Lou Hamers and the Malcolm X's and the W.E.B. Du Bois. Those are who I look to. The Dr. John Henry Clark, Albert Cleage. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm not coming at this because, oh, I've had this awakening. No, I have studied the perspectives of these people. I have studied the realities and the facts of what was represented and what is still represented in the American legal and cultural context. And I've been able to create a conclusion and put together this book, which I hope y'all can go out and tell people to read. I'm not benefiting from this book at all. I put it out here. I'm selling copies, but I've invested more in it financially and more of myself than I think I probably will ever get back. But I do want as many people to have access to it as possible. So I would ask any and everyone, please go out and share with your family, friends, neighbors, everyone in your community.
Yes.
And I'll even come to some of your churches and talk about some of my slides around Christianity.
We're going to talk about that, okay? Because we got to put that in perspective before you go to the churches, honey. Because, we believe that we worshiping right. It's 4 o'clock. But I still need you to do one thing. I still need you to give us you have scenarios in your book about how we experience anti-Blackness in present day, like on our jobs and in school.
Yeah.
You being a human resources professional.
Yes.
And how you see it still being done.
I mean, it's something
a different way, but
it's something simple, right? Like a manager will call me as a human resources manager, or I was an ombuds person at one organization. I've been watching Michelle all day, and she's gone to the bathroom, 4 or 5 times in the last 2 to 3 hours. I think she's been there 5 times. And as a Black human resources professional that's really informed around these issues, right? You want to know what my question back to that person is?
What?
How many times have all of your other employees gone to the bathroom?
Uh-huh.
Because I want to know, is that a practice that you institute with everyone, or is it just Michelle? And even if this is coming from a Black supervisor, because we have been conditioned and trained to scrutinize, over scrutinize, be very aversive to each other in that same way. In the same way. So anti-Blackness is cross-racial. I'm not saying that it's only white people that are anti-Black. I'm saying that in the building, in the construction of American culture, anti-Blackness was created, and everyone, all of us are affected by it. All of us. So I want to know, how many times has Susie or Sally been to the bathroom? I want to know, if you come to me and you say, over the last 6 months, Michelle has been late to work 7 or 8 times. I have it documented, the dates and times. Can you please show me this practice for the last 3 years for all of your employees? How many times have all of them been late? Where's the chart? What are your detailed notes? And most managers will say to me, oh, I don't have that. Okay, so you're saying to me, Manager X, that Michelle has been late 7 times. You've got all the dates and time, but you're telling me that you don't have this for your other employees, and you're expecting me to believe that within the last 3 years, none of them have been late ever? That's not believable. And there's something that by you sharing this with me is leading me to think and understand that you're isolating Michelle for some reason. And I need to understand why that is.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to speculate or come to my own conclusions. I want to hear from you. And when you approach things in that way, people typically don't have answers. They typically do not have responses.
Yeah.
But I understand the functionality of anti-blackness. And the other thing I want to say too is that within these institutions, I have seen and I've told white managers this. I've shared this with them. So you're coming to me to want to discipline or terminate Michelle because, well, it took Michelle too long to finish her online training. It took, Michelle just has a bad attitude. Okay, all of these things are subjective. You're telling me about your impressions of situations that have happened. None of it is factual. What's the business impact? It doesn't even have a substantial business impact. And for some reason, you are preoccupied with an over scrutiny or a heightened degree of sensitivity around how this person is showing up, right? And as a white employee, as a white leader of this organization, you would never allow your manager to come to me to try and terminate you for these reasons. So why do you think it is acceptable for you to now use this type of approach on one of your employees who's an employee who happens to be a Black woman? Can you tell me why that is? And I've seen within these institutions Black people be fired and disciplined without any merit or proof whatsoever. And when it comes to white people being disciplined or terminated, you have to have all your proof, everything to
All
back it up.
documentation. Do you hear
Yeah,
me?
they require it. They require it.
And we are talking about professional settings.
Yeah,
We're not talking,
exactly.
we're talking about professional settings.
Exactly. Oh, little Kathy or little Charles, they talk too much in class. They have a behavioral problem. No, they don't have a behavioral problem. You're not engaging as a teacher. They find you boring. Not only that, it's of their personality and their nature to be active. They have a lot of energy, but they don't have a behavioral problem. It's just according to white normative standards around how children should be acting when they're in class, it's presenting an issue for you. We have to start reframing all of the BS that comes our way. Because if we don't, and if we trust people who do not have our best interest at heart or in mind, we will continue to be, we will continue to play party. We will continue to participate in our own reinforced subjugation and that of our children. So
in closing, you've gotten history, you've gotten data, you've gotten this information. Clearly, you know that Dante is not making up this stuff. We live it. We've experienced this.
Talking to Black people, right?
Okay. So, I want Black folks to stop saying, well, this doesn't affect me right now. This was it does affect you.
You know what I say to
Not
that?
only that, you have to be advocates for your children.
But not only that, here's the deal. You don't feel like it affects you because either you have very low expectations around what full recognition and or validation of your humanity is. So just because you're not being messed with in this moment, you feel like things are fine. But what I tell people, wait your turn.
Right.
If it hasn't found you yet,
because
it's on its way.
Promise you that it may not, I have experienced all of it. Everything that you're talking about in terms of current day on how it is represented. Yeah.
And it may not be you. It may be your children.
Yeah.
It might be someone in your family. But
you need to be able to explain why. and not just
Yeah.
woe is me, it's because I'm Black. No, understand
Yeah.
understand the entire construct of how the infrastructure of America and
Mhm.
the systemic racism it was built upon.
Let me tell you something too. As people, as Black people in this country, I'm going to go to something my mother told me 20 years ago now.
Mhm.
She said, take notes. Take
Amen.
notes about your experience. It, as Black people employed within these institutions that are very hostile toward us, we need to have multiple journals. We need to be filling pages every day
Hmm.
with what our experiences are at work, multiple times a day, multiple times, so that when you have an interaction with that supervisor or that manager and they said something you think is out of pocket, you've noted it right then and there. You've documented it somewhere, and you have quotes about what they said. You have the date and time, so that 3 years later, when you're looking back at it, and now you have a multitude of these experiences, to the point that you just made, you're not saying, "Oh, this is just I've been under, I've been experiencing racism at work." No, you're able to say on March 5th, 2019 at 2 p.m.,
Speechless.
Josh said this, it had this impact. I had to go to the
Mhm.
bathroom. I cried my eyes out. On March 12th at 11 a.m., Brian said this to me. It kind of compounded the effects of the experience that I had just 7 days earlier with Josh. It
Mhm.
had this, I had to leave work early on
Mhm.
April 9th, 2019. Like, you need to
Mhm.
have that laid out
Documentation. I
because,
was passed over for a promotion.
yes, yes,
That too.
yes. And
That too.
for your own mental sanity. I'm not saying it for the purposes of like even taking legal action. I'm talking about so that you can understand that 5, 10, 15 years later, when you find yourself being an emotional wreck, you have compassion for yourself based on what you've been through. And you're able to point to the things that have impacted you, as opposed to finding yourself in a therapy session with a therapist and not understanding why you're there. You'll have 10 years, 15 years of information to refer to. You get what I'm saying? You'll understand why at 40 you need a break from the institution, because the institution has served as a tool of weaponry against you to do nothing but invalidate you and beat you down. And I
And
hope this
well,
is
some of
touching
us aren't
someone.
able to do that, Dante King. Some of us have to, continue to work in.
No, 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 Michelle. What I am saying to you, it's not about, I'm not telling people to leave their jobs. I'm not able to do that. I'm not able to leave employment. I'm not rich. But what I am saying is that you can validate your own experiences and what you go through and what you have gone through by being responsible and taking notes.
Yeah.
You absolutely can.
And you know where else we need to do that, in an area of our medical treatment, and especially with our family members. For those of you who are watching or will be watching in my generation, caregiving for your parents, you will see there's a whole lot of little microaggressions and
They're not micro at all. And I think even that language minimizes the experiences and the realities of what we go through. The impacts of it are not micro at all.
yeah,
The
it's
impacts
macro.
of it, yeah.
Macro.
When we got 2 point something million Black people in jail, 40%, 50% of the Black population, or 50% of the or 40 to 50% of the jail population being Black, and we only represent 12 to 13% of this country. There's nothing micro at all about that. There's nothing micro about the fact that in 2022, you got people making 13, 14, $15 an hour, if that. Those are slave labor wages. Those are, and the price of goods constantly going up based
Right.
on of inflation, aka white affordability. There's nothing micro about that. It has macro impacts. And we have to begin to reframe our experiences through our own language and with a lot of um, um, aggression in terms of the language that we use. We have to be aggressive about this. It's not microaggression. There's nothing micro about you being passed over for a promotion 3 times. I'm sure there's nothing micro about the impact of the salary that you would have received had you gotten promotion 1, promotion 2, promotion 3. There's nothing micro about it.
I stand corrected. You're absolutely right.
So, people say, oh, well, Dante, maybe you're being too radical or maybe you're too vigorous. The only way that one could see me that way or anyone is if they are operating through their conditioning and oppression, because it is expected that Black people and especially Black men play themselves small in this culture.
Mm.
It is a
Oh
cultural
my
it is
God.
it is a cultural requirement. It is a cultural requirement for Black women to not discuss and convey and articulate the ways in which you all feel disenfranchised, the ways in which you have been degraded and feel disrespected and continue to be demeaned. And when you do, you are pathologized as being the B word, as being angry, as being too emotional, as being this or that. It's a cultural agreement, and it's all a trick. It's all a trick.
Diva,
Yes.
drama queen. I've been called it all.
Yeah. So just continue to be invalidated and continue to hold it all in and continue to die early, but never say anything because it breaks the cultural agreement when you say something, when you call it
Ooh,
out.
you better preach.
It is it's a trick.
Dante, thank you.
Thank you, Shell, for
Thank
wanting
you
to spend
for,
this time.
because you know what? I pray that we get lots of viewers in our replay because, we really need to understand this information. Oh my God, it's so many
Yeah,
layers though.
it is. And one of the things
Layers.
I say, one of the things that I say at the beginning of my book is that white people have never interacted with Black people out of a subjugated context. They don't know us.
Yes.
They don't know us on any other terms. And we've never interacted with white people under another context that's outside of superiority.
Outside
Because
of oppression, yes.
outside of our colonization,
Yes.
because we know no other reality. And so
Right.
the cultural agreement requires that we not be empowered at all, because the moment we become empowered, they can't handle it. And even Black people have reactions to Black people standing up for themselves or being empowered. It just shows up differently. We say, girl, look at her. Isn't she doing too much? Girl, look at him. He being all loud over there. Isn't he out of line? Isn't he's doing too much? No, he's not doing too much. She's not doing too much. They're just reacting based on what their experiences have been in this reality. And the fact that you can't relate, I get that, but don't downplay what they've been through. Don't downplay what they are going through in this moment. Affirm your brother and sister, because again, at some point, it will be your turn.
Yes.
It will
And
be
that's
your
what we
turn.
have to do. I think that's the resolution. It's so hard though. It's so hard for
It's
us
not
to
hard. You have to
get.
retrain yourself to do it. I think saying that it's hard is a cop out. We have to
How
prioritize.
will we collectively do that? How do
We have
we
to
collectively do that?
we have to begin to re-educate ourselves. Re-educate ourselves. Use my book as a textbook. Use the other books that I have on my website, that book list, for free. You can go to the library. Even if you can't afford my book, go to San Francisco Library. They ordered some copies. I'm trying to have Oakland and some other places order some too. Go to your local library and tell them to order my book. If you don't want to buy it, go to your local library and tell them to order the book. It's available on Amazon. It's available in different places. But immerse yourself in re-educating yourself about what the experiences of Black people have been in this country, and then create communal spaces like this so that we can come together and support each other. It is not hard at all. We just have to make time and take the type of responsibility that would allow us to make the investment to bring people together. You've
You
done it.
gotta have
You've
the
done it through.
mindset though. I mean, I would love to have like an Afro salon where we sit around and talk about this information. You know, I would love to, but like how many would attend? You got to have the mindset to want to learn.
I'm seeing a ton of comments.
And
We just been on here talking.
we gotta acknowledge
I
at least
see
three. Come on.
My cousin Latanya Thompson. I love you. I love you with all my heart and soul. We were sitting together like this had to be 3 or 4 years ago now. We were at my her sister's house. These are my first cousins, Tanya, Theta, Ebony. And I was just sharing with her the work that I was doing. And we sat there on that couch and she was blown away. She was just like, oh my God, like, I don't even know what to do with this, you know?
Right. That's what a lot of people feel like. I don't even know what do I do with all this information.
I see my mama on here.
Hey, mama.
Deborah King Cooper. Ebony. Hey, cuz. Hey, Ebony. Ingrid. Oh my goodness. I did not know all these people were watching.
Do we have any
Lori was supposed to be on here, and my sister, Nikki. Oh, yeah, they've been on here. They've been watching. Anyway, yeah, this is what it is. The book goes very deep, but I also teach a course through UCSF. It's on my website too.
Yeah.
The course is, I think, like 175 or maybe 150.
www.danteking.com.
Danteking.com. Yeah. Yeah. Ooh. Okay. So I didn't put these up. I didn't know I had to like. Anyway, but these are the banners from my book. And these are the websites.
Affinity organizations, Black affinity organizations, and it doesn't necessarily have to be Black, but affinity organizations, nonprofit organizations, programs. Y'all need to get with this. Y'all need to invite Dante to have a conversation with you, or either have him be a keynote speaker. I'm so glad that your capacity is filling up during this Black History Month, because you're busy. Folks want to know.
Yeah. I've already, I'll say this. I want to give a shout out to different organizations that I've worked with over the last 7 to 10 years. It's really having had those experiences, and how can I say this? Perfecting my craft and my skill around presenting this information, that has helped amplify my work, and it's put my work on different platforms. So the book wasn't a project of, oh, let me write a book and then I'm going to be out here speaking. No, I've already been speaking and teaching in this space for within the last 10 years, and pretty substantially over the last 7. The book was, let me get this project done, because this was supposed to be my dissertation work anyway. And because most people are not in the spaces where I am lecturing or teaching, they could at least have some insight, or be given some insight through this book about what my work entails.
Dante, I really do see you teaching on a college level.
I have already. I mean, I am. I lecture a course
like
at
on
UCSF.
like on a regular basis, like
right.
in the
future.
I mean, like getting tenure and all of that.
Oh, I don't. Well,
you know, that's not your goal.
We'll see. Yeah, because
I see it. Maybe I'm speaking it.
We'll have to see. We'll have to see.
Hmm.
But anyway, I want to thank
Thank
everybody that has taken time
Yes.
to watch this discussion to participate. Um, my family has been so ride or die. My mom really knows more than everyone else the impact that this has taken
Yes.
on me, that this has had on me.
Hmm.
Um, and there's no shortage of an impact emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Going through this process of developing the curriculum that I teach and writing this book, it literally put me in therapy. It literally put me in a depressed state. Um, and it wasn't just the studying, if you
Information.
will. It was the my life experience and what I was going through at
Yeah.
work. At work. It's what I was going through, experiencing in my life at work. At work. And it put me in a state of it was it wrecked me.
Hmm.
It wrecked me, and there are lingering effects from it. I won't go into substantial detail, but
Yeah.
there are definitely lingering effects, and I know so many other people who have been impacted in similar ways. And
Yes.
I have worked in environments where I'm providing support to these people, and they're unable to articulate all that they've been through and the impacts that it's had on them. But I know because inherently I can relate. Inherently, I can relate. You
Hmm.
understand? Yeah, I
Absolutely.
know you do. I know you do. So anyway, I
Thank
love
you,
you, Michelle.
Dante. I love you. And I do encourage everyone the 400-year Holocaust and then the subtext. I'm going to say it all. The 400-year Holocaust, white America's legal, psychopathic, and sociopathic Black genocide, and the revolt against critical race theory. I encourage you to buy this. Thank you for taking the time to speak to me. I love having conversation with you.
Same here,
And
Shell.
I
And
guess
it is a revolt because this is what they're revolting against. They don't want us to dig into
they
this
don't want us to
information
know this. Mm-mm.
because if we dig into this information, we will fully understand
Yeah,
why they are operating the way that they're operating.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
So it's crazy.
It is. It is. So, viewers, those who watch, those who will be watching, thank you so much. Dante, I love you
I love you
and
too.
take care. All
You
right?
too,
Talk to
Shell.
you soon.